So, welcome back. I've already done a video on compression, but I figure I'd go over the three different levels of thinking that go into using a compressor. So you have your basic thinking, which is, I need to control the difference between loud and quiet. So I'm going to turn the loud peaks down and turn the low peaks up. That will give you a more consistent signal. However, that's really basic. So, in this video, I'm going to start with an intermediate. This is going to be a little bit more advanced than the basic volume control. So first things first, transient shaping. We all know what transients are, and we've always thought, this sounds good, but I need a little bit more snap on my kick. I want my clap to be a little bit, have a little bit more of a crack to it. I need to make sure that my bass really pops through. That's where compressors come in handy. So here we go, here's a kick drum. It sounds good, but it's thudding, it's not really snapping. So you can either bring the attack down or you could do some automation. I don't want to do automation 90% of the time, so let's crank that threshold. I'm going to slam this with compression. Here we go. That sounds terrible, it's squished. You can just kind of hear that it doesn't really do anything. So let's start pushing this back. Now you're starting to hear the snap. There we go. So that's about where I'd leave it, around 57. 57 is going to give me a lot of body, a lot of snap, and it's not going to take away from the low end. So one of the things I didn't learn until pretty late into using compressors, when you have the attack set too quickly, it actually eats up your low end. So low frequencies take a little bit of time for them to form. If your attack hits before then, you're cutting off those low frequencies, and it's going to kind of just kill a lot of that low end. So if you do it on your kicks, on your 808s, on your bass, any of that kind of stuff, it could actually ruin your signal. So it's best to keep them 50 or above if it's a low instrument that you want to keep all the low end energy intact. So next thing, I'm just gonna bring back my kick to bass level. So I'm taking off about 9 decibels. Let's back this off a little bit actually. Okay, that's about 5. I'm gonna put it at 4. Okay. So we've already got the transient shaping. We've already kind of talked about the low end. Let's go into side chaining. So we've all had that issue where we have our drums and our bass playing, and our kick and our bass just seem to take up the same space. How would you go about cleaning that? Well, you could use a sidechain. I have my kick routed into my bass channel, and I have this compressor right here set to external, and I have my kick working as the external. Now, I'm going to use a basic sidechain. So let's start reducing this. There we go. So what this is doing is every time the kick hits, it acts as the thing that's triggering the compression. So when the kick hits above the threshold, it'll turn down the bass. That's super useful because what happens is your kick and your bass are now trading space. When your kick hits, your bass moves. When your bass has the room to take up all the space it needs, it will. So that's a super useful way to make sidechaining really accessible in your mix. So another thing is limiting. A lot of us, we are pretty scared of limiting, or we try to use it kind of minimalistically. I personally don't love limiting. However, It's really useful when you have a sound that you just need to make sure does not go above a certain point. This is a perfect way to control it. So I'm going to take this bass, I'm going to solo it, and now I'm going to load up limiter. Here's the limiter. There's no real settings other than the release and the threshold. What is the ratio? Infinite. It is going to be a hard cap to the top of the volume. So if I go here and I just start lowering this while it's playing, you're going to notice the volume just dies and you're going to notice a lot of distortion when it happens. You notice there's a ton of reduction on this. So what that's doing is it's capping it off. Super useful on vocals because a compressor can sometimes leave a little bit of a spike at the beginning and the end of phrases before the attack has fully had time to trigger, or when the release lets off a little bit too quickly. This is a super useful tool for just getting a hard line across there. Really useful on vocals. So the next thing is saturation. Most people wouldn't think of saturation as compression, but it is. It's distortion, which is like, it is compression. So if I were to take a limiter and I just start slamming this with the clip distortion, you notice it's reducing. You notice it's not moving. Because saturation, distortion is limiting, is compression. It's all the same. So a little bit of clipping, a little bit of saturation can go a long way. And it's a quick way to add upper harmonics to your sounds and make them cut in a mix. Really useful on a bass that sounds really good on big speakers, but when you play it on your phone, you notice the bass is gone. It's a good way to get some frequencies in the upper range so people can hear it on the go. Okay, so that's pretty much the basics for transient shaping, side chaining, limiting, and saturation. I already explained how bass is affected by the attack you have set on your compressor, so I'm not going to go over that again. And now, let's go over parallel compression. New York compression, whatever you want to call it, it is a great way to get a little bit more snap, a little bit more impact, but also give you a very, very smooth, controlled output. So I'm going to move these out of here so there's less on the screen. And I just have this compressor loaded. I have the ratio maxed out. I have the attack at 3 milliseconds and the release at 115. This is going to basically destroy anything I run into it, as long as it's going over that threshold. So I have my drums going. Here's what my drums sound like going through this. It sounds terrible. It is way too heavy-handed. It is destroyed. However, you can use that completely slam signal and blend it in with your original signal to create a kind of a floor, because as long as this is hitting, it's going to hit at the same consistent level in the background. So you can just blend that in with your signal, and then next thing you know, you have a perfectly, slamming drum setup. Here's my drums if I route them back. Here's everything together. Now here's with the parallel off. You notice there's a little bit more energy. However, you don't always want to put all the full signal in there because it could get a little bit too much too quickly. So you put it on another channel and you just blend it in. So I'm going to set it to taste. I'm going to play the full instrumental. There we go. So I have it blended in 50%, and that's going to give me a little bit more of that extra ground level body without actually adding too much volume to the final sound. Okay, so another thing is cascade compression. That doesn't really mean anything other than stacking compressors. On a vocal, on my vocal specifically, you'll notice I have several different things that are adding some compression into my mix. All four of these, this is saturation, compression, saturation and compression, and a little bit of saturation and compression. The reason I do that is because one of them will catch peaks, the next one will smooth out the smoothed out thing. So anytime I have a quick, like a quick pop, that first compressor is going to catch it and it's going to turn it down. The next one, it's going to take that evened out signal and it's going to smooth that out even more. The next one, it's going to round it out even more. So my analogy I like to use is wood. If you try to bend it too quickly, all at once, it's going to snap. But if you move it little by little in sections, it'll slowly curve. You'll get a flex. And that is what compression is. It's very easy to kind of just crack things, make them just too snappy or just make them sound odd if you go too heavy right off. But if you use multiple compressors, you can get a nice even signal, just like my vocal. And just so y'all know, I do have a limiter because I don't like my vocal to pop too much. Without it, if I jump, like you'll notice quick jumps in it, and if I get too excited, it's gonna start peaking, and I don't need that. So there we go. And the last thing is multiband compression. Multiband compression, a lot of people think, oh, it's got more knobs, therefore it's more advanced. You're not, once you get good, you don't have to use a compressor, you just use a multiband on everything because you get more control. No, not how that works at all. Multiband compression just allows you to single out frequencies specifically. If you have, let's say, this drum loop right here, or this percussion loop, if there's one sound in this loop and I just need it to be controlled, I don't have access to the individual sounds. So instead of trying to split it up into like in the playlist and like route things to individual channels, that gets way too messy. I may go, I like everything but the low mids. Also, I'm using Wave C6 for this because they don't make a multiband for the Dead Duck plugins. So if I really just want these frequencies controlled, then I could use a multiband tool to just separate the low instruments. Really good for if you're using a drum break and the snare's too much or the kick's too much. You could very easily control it with this. You could add compression to the snare or the kick without affecting the cymbals. So I'm just going to play this and I'm going to start lowering the threshold on this compressor. So here's with it, and here's without. It's just an easy way to get a little bit control when you don't have access to the individual elements. So what we're left with at the end of the day is a full mix. And that is the 3 levels of compression. You have just the basics, volume control. Then on intermediate, you have transient shaping, using the attack and release to accent things or to, get the initial snap clicking. And then everything else, just turn it down a little bit because it's not as important as the snap. Side chaining, limiting, saturation, just allowing things to take control when they need to hit and back out of the way when they're not important. Limiting and saturation, just adding beef and just kind of evening out the signal all around. And in the advanced, we have parallel compression, New York compression, same thing. You have cascade compression, which is just stacking compressors to get multiple stages so you're not burning your sounds or over compressing right off. You're working it in steps. And the last thing, multiband. Really useful when you don't have access to the individual elements. So that is the 3 levels of compression. I wish I had more time to explain it. And if you're confused or you would like to see a video on all these separated into their own video so I can get more into depth with any specific thing that may interest you, just leave a comment, send me a message on Facebook. You know how to reach me. And I hope you learned something today. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Anyways, peace.